I'll be checking the chat throughout the entire training. So if anyone has any
Perfect.
questions, please send them in the chat and I'll relay them to Anne so she can concentrate primarily on the presentation, but she will answer questions throughout. Does anyone have any
Okay.
questions before we begin? All right, great. Anne?
Okay, very good. Anika, thank you so much. And Belinda, thank you for inviting me back. I've talked with your group a couple of times before, and I enjoy all of you and admire all of you. I'm a community mediator myself. I'm in Grand Rapids, so I'm mediating at our center here. And before that, I lived in Lansing, and I was actually the director of the center there. So I have a heart for community mediation. So, looking forward to talking with you today about apologies in mediation. And the handout that we sent you is really a guide that you'll want to be referring to throughout my talk. So you don't have to print it, but you'll want to have it handy. So if you have it on a separate screen or something so that you can follow along, because I will be referring to that. So a man was suing his ex-girlfriend for items to recover items that he had bought for her, gifts for her. And he told me in caucus that he had no regrets except for one thing. He said, I put some mean things about her on Facebook, and I really regret that, and I don't know what to do about it. Would you know how to help him? A colleague of ours, Daryl Pulse, represented a man who had been fired from his job with the Seattle Public School System. And Daryl represented him. They filed a lawsuit. They settled it. And Daryl happily produced a nice check to the man and handed it to him. It was a check in the six figures. And the man took the check and he started weeping. Daryl thought he was weeping because he was so happy to receive the check. No, he was weeping because he said, all I wanted was an apology. So my question to you is, would you know how to handle either of those situations? So an apology can be really beneficial to the parties, and it can be the critical piece of mediation. But I find that mediators miss it either because they don't hear the hints that an apology is possible, or they sense that the apology is possible, but they don't know what to do with it. So we're going to address both of those situations here today. Can you see my screen because it's not outlining? Do you see the PowerPoint? Okay, good. You know how it usually has that little green thing around it and it doesn't. Okay. So two goals today. One is to recognize opportunities to facilitate apologies, and the other is to equip you with skills to actually do the apology. So have you been in mediation where an apology was given? Anybody, show of hands?
No.
Where have you seen it? Oh, excellent. Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Okay, interesting. So in those mediations where you saw an apology, was the mediator involved in any way? A couple of you are nodding. Yep. Okay. Excellent. I'm happy to hear that. So sometimes there's a mediation, but it's spontaneous, right? Like we didn't, as mediators, we didn't have anything to do with it. It just happens. Sometimes the mediator did have something to do with it, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I have also encountered mediators who say, no, I never let people apologize in my mediations. That personal stuff is for afterwards. We're not going to do that here. That's not the spirit of community mediation, right? We want to address the whole person. So we're going to talk about how a mediator can assist in apologies. So my bias here is that as a member of the Christian faith, apology or confession is how we establish our relationship with God through Jesus Christ, and we confess our sins, and then we are commanded to also confess our sins, apologize to one another. So much of my practice involves encouraging Christians to do this very thing. But, apology is certainly not unique to the Christian faith. It's really a part of all human relationships. It's kind of the oil that keeps our relationships running smoothly. And so apology is a universal good thing. And it's really a privilege to be part of it when we've done those in mediations. Would you agree, those of you who've seen a mediation with an apology? It can be a powerful thing. It can be very helpful. So, this is what we're going to be talking about today. Let me get my mouse over here. Okay. So we're going to, 4 components. What are the elements of a good apology? Whether to consider the apology in mediation, when the apology should occur, and then actually how to manage it. So first we're going to talk about the what. What goes into a good apology? So I'm curious about your experience. How many of you have ever received a good apology? You can raise your hands if you've received a good apology. Okay, so you know it when you see it. Some of you are thinking about it. Yep, okay. Have you ever had to make a heartfelt apology? You're reluctant to admit it. We're not going to ask you the circumstances, I promise, but so you know what it feels like to do a heartfelt apology. Okay. Have you ever given an apology for some reason other than real remorse? Oh, reluctance there. Okay, how about this? Have you ever received such an apology? Yeah, okay. I see thumbs up and I see people nodding. And, if you're with this last one, if you're having to think about it, think about apologies from your kids. I'm sorry, with the eye roll, right? Yeah, that's not a great apology. And so you do have experience with apologies. So this is an opportunity for us to do a breakout if Anika's up for this. I'd like us to break up into like groups of 3, and I'd like you to talk about what is one thing that needs to be in a good apology, and then talk about what is one thing that should not be in an apology. We'll give you 5 minutes for that, okay? So when you break up into your groups, be sure to introduce yourself to the other people in case you don't know them, and then just talk about what should be in an apology and what should not be in an apology.
Okay, I'm going to assign people to rooms now, so just give me 1 second.
Good to see your happy faces. I'm going to talk now about what I think are the essential elements of an apology, and you can see if I matched the things that you talked about in your small groups. So what I'm going to talk about are what I call the 4 R's of a good apology. And I'm building here on work from Carrie Petrucci and also from Gary Chapman. So 4 essential elements of a good apology, and they all happen to start with R. So the first one is taking responsibility. I was wrong. I did it. I made a mistake. It helps if you can acknowledge what your action did, the impact that it had on the other person. I'm going to use the terms victim and offender throughout this training just to keep it simple. So the victim is the person who was offended against and wants the apology, and the offender is the person who caused the harm, just to keep it simple. It also helps in responsibility if the speaker acknowledges specifically what they did that caused the harm. The listener wants to know that you know what you did that hurt them. So that's the first R. R is some form of remorse or regret. And in English, this is usually the word sorry, right? I'm sorry. And it helps if the next word is for. I'm sorry for doing whatever you did. Not, I'm sorry that you were hurt. I'm sorry that you were offended, right? That kind of weakens the apology, but I'm sorry for a specific thing. I'm sorry for causing your pain. Another category would be some statement of restitution or repair. I broke it, I'm going to fix it. I will take care of it. I will make this right. I will pay it back. I will restore whatever needs to be restored. Sometimes it's not something tangible. Oftentimes it's trust. So it would be something like, it may take time. I realize it may take time for you to trust me again. And the fourth one is some indication that you intend to reform your behavior to make sure that this is not going to happen again. Here's what I'm going to do to make sure that this isn't going to happen again. So do these correspond with what you came up with in your groups for what needs to be in a good apology? Yeah, I'm seeing some nods. Okay, good. Now there are public apologies, and so we get lots of opportunities to think about what goes into a good apology and what doesn't. I just think it's interesting. And, you know, there's a steady slew of apologies from athletes, entertainers, politicians, even the Pope. So he was in a meeting this spring, and it was a private meeting, but he allegedly said something sort of negative about gay men. And so the Vatican issued this apology. The Pope never intended to offend or express himself in homophobic terms, and he extends his apologies to those who were offended by the use of a term that was reported by others. So what do you think about this apology? Does it nail those 4 R's? Okay, I was seeing no's. What's wrong with it? You can put it in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself. Kathy, what's missing?
He doesn't even say that he did it. That was, whatever it was.
Right.
Was
First
reported
thing,
by others.
responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Yes, a term that was reported by others. Yeah, exactly. So, and you know what, I have to say, public apologies are tricky, and there's lots of different audiences there. So I'm not judging here. I'm just showing you how difficult it is to do a good public apology. Even the Pope struggles with it. But it's a great illustration of how the apology feels just a little bit off. And then when we think about it, there's no real responsibility here. So another author, Gary Chapman, he wrote this book, 5 Languages of Apology, and he adds a 5th R, which is to request forgiveness. And that just means that at the end of the apology, you ask if the other person will forgive you. Will you forgive me? There, that's it. So what should not be in the apology? I'm going to go through some things, and then we'll see if this corresponds with what you came up with in your groups. Here's some ideas. If I did anything to offend you, if I lost my temper. No, you did lose your temper, and the fact that you're waffling on it makes me think you're not really sorry about this, right? So here's an example of this from Tiger Woods. If I offended anybody in any way, shape, or form, I'm sorry. It was not intended to be that way. He was doing this kind of prank thing with one of the other golfers, but people saw it, and it was a little offensive. But the if, kind of undercuts what he's trying to say there. Maybe is another one. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe if you had reminded me. Maybe I don't really think I'm sorry. So that's another word that weakens the apology. Or the big one is but. How many of you came up with this word in your groups? Yeah. Kathy, did you have your hand up? Did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, that is going back to when you said somebody added the 5th thing to an apology, which was to request forgiveness.
Yeah.
That, to me, that's a little bit iffy to say that that should be included, because you're kind of then, I think the person doesn't have to forgive, that's voluntary. And so if you're asking or whatever, then you're kind of making them the bad person, maybe if they don't or something. So,
Like putting the onus on them.
right.
Now it's shifted to them, the burden. Yep. Good point. So not always appropriate, but there might be times when that's exactly what you need to do. And it's recognizing that you can't make the other person forgive you and you don't deserve their forgiveness. You're just sort of offering it. But yes, point well taken. So that's why I say the 4 R's. I don't say the 5. Yep. So I don't know if you talked about but in your groups. This is often one that people recognize as should not be in the apology. Peacemaker Ministries says the but acts like an eraser, and all the good stuff you said before, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have done that, I recognize it caused you harm, but you made me so mad when, and then the listener only hears everything after the but, right? And so our recommendation is to find a place to put a period and just stop before you get to the but. So what's the main thing that people say that they want in an apology? One word. Anybody can. Yep. Yes. It's make I statements. Absolutely right. Yep. I'm thinking of a different word, but yeah, I instead of you can help with a good apology. I'm thinking of the word sincerity. I'm sorry, Kathy?
I just said sorry, that you're sorry.
Sorry, yes, right. That's another one. And people usually say what they want the apology to be is sincere. And so there's some different ways to make sure that the apology is sincere. You want to avoid anything that, like if it sounds like it was involuntary or coerced in some way. The boss told me I need to apologize to you. That kind of undercuts the apology, right? Or when we tell our children that they need to apologize, that doesn't always go over so well. Another thing to be avoided is blaming. So blaming something or someone. I didn't get enough sleep. I had too much to drink. You left the door open. You forgot to remind me. Any of those things are going to minimize the apology. Minimizing is another thing, like, oh, that wasn't such a big deal. Why are you getting so upset over this? All I did was, all of those things can sort of weaken the apology. Using passive voice, which was kind of what we saw in the Pope's apology, the classic line here would be, mistakes were made, right? So there's no I, as you were noticing, needs to be in there. And it doesn't really acknowledge much. So look out for passive voice. And then an explanation. Once we get on that apology rule, it's so easy to start, I got the days confused because I hadn't gotten enough sleep and I didn't. And so you're giving an explanation, what you think is an explanation, but what your listener hears is an excuse. And so our recommendation is save the explanation until the listener says, what on earth were you thinking? And then you can offer your explanation, and then it's going to sound less like an excuse. So how closely did we align with what you talked about in your groups for what needs to be in a good apology and what doesn't? Anybody want to comment on that? Are we close? Joan, did you want to say something?
I think we also included that putting the blame on the other person for feeling upset. Sorry. You took it. I'm sorry you took it that way. That was your problem. Right?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I'm sorry that you took it that way. I'm sorry that you were hurt. Yep. And so you end up not apologizing for anything and putting it on the other person. Because what you're really saying is you shouldn't have taken it that way, right? You shouldn't feel hurt. And you're just saying it in a backhanded way. Yeah, good, good. All of those things. Okay, so we've talked about, oh yeah, the last thing she told me was, would it kill you to apologize? I guess it did. You're saying it. Good. All right, so we talked about what. Let's talk for a minute about the whether to apologize. So what types of cases lend themselves to an apology? So I think any kind of case that includes a relationship could lend itself to, could be open to an apology. So neighbor cases, employment cases, family cases, domestic relations cases. The ADR section had a speaker a few years ago, Lee Taft, who specializes in mediating cases involving medical malpractice. So doctors and patients, or healthcare professionals and patients, just in that field, and he uses apology a lot. And so I think for our purposes, it might be more appropriate to say what case wouldn't lend itself to an apology, that maybe mediators ought to always keep open the possibility that there is an element of apology as part of the resolution. But of course, the legal system has no place for apology. And if you are mediating with attorneys, they are going to question the need for an apology. They might even push back on whether there should be an apology. So do we have any attorneys in the group? What do attorneys think about having your clients apologize? Usually attorneys are a little reluctant or hesitant. They don't have any experience with it. Apologies are legally irrelevant, so it's kind of not really part of the case. It's not what we should be focusing on. It could reduce the damages in one way or another, and so there might be pushback from the attorneys. But in my experience, if you can get them to see the possible benefits of it, they are going to be huge assistance in bringing about an apology in a mediation. Research shows that a full apology leads to greater satisfaction, less anger, more sympathy. It can lead to a better resolution. And there's some studies listed in the articles at the end of your handout to that effect. But research also shows that if the offender is at fault and they give only a partial apology, it actually makes things worse. So it would be better not to say anything at all. And I think we all instinctively know that. We know that apologies are delicate, right? Like they can be great, but if it's a weak apology, it can actually make things worse. And so we kind of tend to steer away from it for that reason. And so research backs it up that we have a good reason for being cautious about apologies. But here's the good news. Not everyone needs a full-blown 4 hours apology. We can think about what level of acknowledgement does the victim need to hear, along with what level of acknowledgement is the offender able to give. And so there are Christopher Moore, who wrote a wonderful book on mediation, has identified levels of psychological closure. The mediation process book, it's a thick book, and this is only the 3rd edition, but it's got great stuff in it. I highly recommend it. And he talks about levels of psychological closure. So maybe all the case needs is an acknowledgement of what happened, or maybe that's all the offender is even able to give, or an ownership of what happened. I did this. I'll take responsibility for that. Affirmation of a better relationship in the future. So I'm going to take some ownership and I'm going to say, I want the future to be better than the past was. And then we get to the genuine 4 hours apology. And beyond that would be forgiveness, because that would be the appropriate response to an apology, and then reconciliation. So he's coming up with all these different levels. And not every case needs genuine apology. As Kathy noted, not every case needs forgiveness. Not every case needs reconciliation. But so maybe it's just an acknowledgement. One of my colleagues, Dale Iverson, was mediating a case involving some farmers here in West Michigan. And in the caucus with one of them, he said the other guy needs to apologize. And Dale said, okay, I can talk to him about that. What would you like to hear? And he didn't have any ideas. He didn't know. And so Dale just said, well, what if he says something like, I apologize for how my actions have hurt you? And the farmer said, he doesn't need to grovel. So, I mean, it seemed like what she was offering was a pretty basic apology, right? But to the farmer, that was groveling. So that farmer did not need a genuine apology. He would be satisfied with something much less, a level much lower than that. I did a case one time involving family business with some cousins. And during the joint session, one of them said something really mean to one of his cousins. And I could tell that the other cousin was hurt. So I called a caucus right then, and I met with the offender, and we talked about it, and he agreed that he should not have said it, and we talked about apologizing. So we come back into the room, and I turn to Joe, and I say, Joe, is there anything you'd like to say? And he says, yes. I'm sorry. He said it like that, like he was mocking the whole thing, and I thought, oh no, this is terrible. It's going to send everything in the wrong direction. So I look over at the other cousins, and they're all laughing. They're cracking up. So I said, how are you reading this? And they said, we never thought we would hear the word sorry come out of Joe's mouth. So even though it was a terrible apology, the other side accepted it and they moved on because they didn't need that full level of the genuine apology. And Joe probably wasn't able to give it anyway, so it's a good thing. So that's just to show you that even though we talk about the 4 R's, you may not need that level of apology in the mediation. The parties may not need to hear it, and the parties may not be able to give it. So we've talked about what, we've talked about whether. Now we can talk about when. When is the best time for the apology? And my honest answer here is it all depends. Every case is different. I don't have a good answer for you on this one. Kenneth Cloak is a nationally known mediator, and he starts his mediations by saying, who wants to apologize for something? I would never do that. I know. I'm not clear whether he has already worked with the parties separately before he brings them together to ask that question. I would hope so. I would think he would need to do that. If somebody apologizes, he turns to the listener and says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate that apology? And if the listener rates it below 10, he says, what would it take for it to be a 10? And then turns to the offender and encourages them to make that improved apology. I'm impressed with that. I don't go there. I can't do that. But that's just the level of apology that some mediators do. I've seen apologies in the party opening, and I've seen those be successful, and I've seen them kind of backfire. I'm thinking of one case where an employer-employee case, and the employer apologized right off the bat, and the employee told me in caucus that it just made her suspicious, like she thought he was trying to apologize so that she would reduce her demand, and not take it seriously. So that's the risk of going first. It could be part of the negotiations. In my experience, when attorneys are involved, they usually want the apology to come afterwards. Let's negotiate the substance, the money, or whatever, and then we can deal with the apology afterwards. Some mediators recommend that we just wait until the mediation is over to do the apology. So there could be different times as to when it should happen. All right, so we've talked about the when. So now let's talk about the how. I have attended other courses on apology and mediation, and it seems like they only get this far. They don't get into the details of how to actually do an apology. So that's what I want to share with you. In my handout, I have a chart, but I'm going to go through it in the slides here. It's just sort of an overview. It helps me think about the different kinds of situations. And I want to emphasize that facilitating an apology is delicate. We never want to step on the party's toes here. It's their mediation. Self-determination is very important, and I am never going to impose an apology on people. I may raise it as a possibility if I hear clues that it might be useful, but it's their mediation, it's their outcome, it's their apology, so we're never going to impose it on them. Having said that, there are cases where the victim suggests that they would love to hear an apology and the offender indicates that they are willing to apologize. And that's the easiest case for a mediator. So then all you have to do is facilitate it, which is what we're going to talk about in a few minutes. A little harder when one party thinks that an apology would be helpful, but the other party is resistant or reluctant. So it might be that the victim indicates they'd really like to hear an apology, but the offender is hesitant. Or maybe the offender really wants to apologize and the victim is not interested in hearing it. So in those cases, the mediator is going to broach the topic with the other party and just sort of explore if there's any chance that they would be open to an apology. So very delicate, gentle. The hardest case is where neither party is indicating an interest in an apology, but you know that that would just be the best thing for the parties if they could just apologize and accept that. And then, you know, like neighbors that have to live next door to each other no matter what, if they could apologize, that would just help so much. But then again, all you can do is kind of broach the topic gently with both sides and see if there's any possibility of apology. So I'm using the word clues here, and now I'm on page 3 of your handout, to talk about what the mediator is listening for to determine whether there's a possibility of an apology. I used to use the word hint, but hints makes it sound like the speaker is intentionally dropping hints. Even clues sounds like it's intentional. And I think a lot of times when people say these things, they're not asking for an apology. They're just sharing how they're feeling in that moment. I feel terrible about what I did. I wish there was something I could do to make up for it. They're not saying, I want an apology. So in that sense, it's a clue. Does that make sense? That it's just an indication that perhaps an apology would address the concerns that they're expressing. So I don't think money's going to fix this. I wish I had never done it. What else can I do to make things right? My case story that I started out with in the beginning, the ex-boyfriend who said, I don't know what to do about that, but I feel terrible about the things that I posted on Facebook. And so those are indications to you as a mediator that there's a possibility of an apology here. There could also be indications from the victim, and these might be in joint session or they could be in caucus. The least they could do is apologize. She never even called. She never even indicated that she was concerned about me. So those might be clues that the victim would be open to receiving an apology. So on your handout, there is a page. Let me pull this up here. Page 3, there's several comments on page 3 there's a victim list and there's an offender list. And what we'd like you to do is select 3 of those comments and just take a minute to think about what you would say next if you were the mediator. So everybody with me on page 3 of your handout. So the clues from the offender and clues from the victim. I don't know if you can see this. That's what it looks like on the handout. So we've got the PowerPoint slides that I just showed, those clues from the offender or from the victim. And just choose 3 of them and jot down what you would say in response. What would you say next to any of those? So take a minute to do that. Does everybody understand where we are and what the exercise is?
Lavana, did you wanna ask a question?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually,
Oh,
sorry, it's actually related to that because sometimes, when somebody says, "Oh, I really feel bad about what I did," it takes the focus from the victim to the offender. So it's kind of, you have to console the one who needs to be consoled.
what a great observation. Yes, yes. And that could minimize how the victim is feeling because now all the attention is on the offender. Yeah,
Mhm.
great observation. Okay, anybody want to share any of these? Share what the statement was and then what you think the mediator should say next. Kathy, yeah. Kathy McPhail.
Yeah, so when I think I have heard victims say things like she never even called to see how I was doing, and then you could basically ask, would you like to get an apology, and just see if that's something that they're open to.
Exactly. So framing it as a question, not like, oh, you need an apology, but framing it as a question. Yep. Good. Perfect.
Carolyn,
Anybody else
did you
want to
have?
share one?
Yep.
Yeah, I picked the same one actually. And I said that I would have said first reflected something back, like it sounds like having her check in is something that would have made you feel better in this situation, and you're feeling sad, mad, upset that that didn't happen. What would you have liked to have seen happen? And then follow up with what would you like to see happen moving forward, so that they have a chance to bring it up themselves rather than me putting that out there on them as something that could happen.
Yep. Perfect. Perfect. Nice and gentle. Yeah, good. Kathy Gourlay.
Yeah, the one I picked was when the offender says, "What else can I do to make things right?" Um, I think I wouldn't say too much. In fact, I might say nothing and just let the person who was hurt answer that, or kind of repeat it. Is there anything else that you would like from the offender or something? It seems like that's a really good question for the defender to ask. What else can I do to make things right?
You're imagining that the offender and victim are in the same room when the offender says that?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. So yes, then you can just turn to the victim and say,
Is there
yeah,
anything, or what do you
is
think
there
about that?
anything?
Yeah.
Right. Yep. And in the caucus, so that's what, the ex-boyfriend case that I was talking about in the caucus, that's kind of what he was saying to me, what else can I do to make this right? And he didn't have any ideas, and we're in caucus. And so I said, well, one option would be an apology. What do you think about that? And he was like, that's a great idea. I never thought about that. I have no idea how to apologize. And so we talked about how, helped him through the steps of it. So yeah, good. Well, you'll be interested to know that the some answers are on the bottom of page 3 in your handout. There are some suggestions of possible mediator responses right there, but I wanted you to think some through, and you're totally on track. So at the bottom of page 3 are things you could say in the caucus with the victim when they say stuff like, they never even bothered to apologize, or they never called me, they never called to find out who I am. You know, what else would you like to see happen here? Is this something you'd like to explore? You said in the joint session that they could apologize. Do you want to deal with that? So those are things you could say in the caucus with the victim. And then suggestions at the top of page 4 in the caucus with the offender. So playing it through, like you mentioned that she won't listen to your apology. If we were to talk about it today, would you like to try it again? And we can see if she's open to that. If you were to apologize, what might you say? Think about apologies you've received. What's important to be in them? What's important not to be in them? These are all, you know, like you're kind of coaching them through, assuming that they're with you on this idea. Even asking them, getting them to think about delivering the apology to the other person. So what kind of response would you expect to hear after you make your apology? What if you don't get that response? What's another possibility? What, you know the person better than I do. How are they likely to respond? How are you going to manage that if that's how they respond? So kind of preparing their expectations. Those are all things you can do. And that all of that helps them decide, do I want to make an apology or not? It's still up to them. Even if you're helping them figure it out, it's still up to them what they're going to do. So if any of you do private practice, I don't know if any of you do, but when I am doing cases where there are attorneys, I usually have a pre-mediation conference call with both of the attorneys, and that's my first opportunity to raise the possibility of an apology. And it's usually in the context of outcomes, like what kind of outcomes are you looking for? What kind of outcomes have you talked about? Have you thought about non-monetary outcomes? And usually there's silence, and then somebody says, like what? And then I say, oh, like an apology or reinstatement or, you know, things like that. And then usually there's more silence because nobody's thinking about non-monetary outcomes. But I've planted the seed, and then I can follow up with them on the possibility whether an apology could be an element of the outcome. And then in my mediator opening, and you can all do this, and maybe some of you do, you know, in our opening statement, we talk about the benefits of mediation, and this is the opportunity for you to come up with creative outcomes that you could never get in court. And then I say, like an apology. Do any of you include that in your opening when you talk about Okay, Craig does. All right, good. So you're just planting the seed, you know, you're just tossing it out there, and you have no idea, because usually we don't know anything about these cases, but I just put it in there. It's just part of the opening. So, you know, we're just kind of planting the seed there. So then, like, these are questions that you could ask even in the joint session. What else could the offender do to make this right for you? Or I'm just brainstorming here. Would an apology help? With the offender, you could say, is there anything else you can do besides paying money? Or this question, anything you want to change for the future? I got this from a domestic relations mediator. She mediates divorces, and you know, parties usually have to have some kind of relationship going forward, whether there's a divorce or not. And so she's always looking for ways to incorporate an apology into her divorce mediations. And this is the question she asks: is there anything you want to change for the future? I think that's a great question. So the mediator can assist one party to apologize and the other party to receive an apology. So if we've explored the groundwork and they're ready to do this, these are some ways that you can go forward with this. So in the caucus with the offender, what we're recommending is actually 3 steps. So you meet privately with the offender and get them thinking about an apology. Then you meet privately with the victim to prepare them to receive the apology. And then you meet again with the offender to hear how they're thinking about the apology and maybe even practice it. And then you bring them together in joint session. So that's kind of the big picture here. And within each of these meetings, so when you first caucus with the offender, you explore their willingness to apologize, and you're holding it lightly, like, if you were to apologize, what might you say? If you were to apologize, what might you not say? Because they're still deciding whether they want to do this or not, right? If they have an attorney, use the attorney. I'm surprised how many mediators tell me they ask the attorney to be quiet while they're talking about apology. No, the attorneys can be really helpful here. They get the benefit of it, and they can almost intervene between you and the party. They know their client, so they can be very helpful. Talk with them about when should be the apology. Should it be in the mediation, after the mediation? You can ask them, while you're thinking about apology, I need to go and talk with the other side. What would you like me to tell them about this? Do you want me to tell them that you're thinking about an apology? Should I not say anything about it? So clarify that. Help them figure out the form of delivery. Like, are you going to do it verbally? Are you going to write it out? Are you going to have, bullet points on a note card? Just thinking that through. And then ask them to work on their apology while you go to caucus with the victim. Any questions or comments about that, working with the offender, that first meeting? Okay. So now we go to the caucus with the victim. And you're preparing them for the possibility of an apology, but don't tell them that an apology is coming, because you don't know what's going to happen. I have had many a mediation where I worked with a party in caucus and they were going to apologize, and we got the people back together, and I turned to them and say, Mary, do you have anything you'd like to say? And she says, nope. So there you go, right? You can't force people to make an apology. You have to hold it lightly all the way through. You just don't know. And maybe she'll apologize later, but just in that moment, she kind of lost her nerve. That's okay. We're not forcing it on anyone. So you definitely don't want to make a promise to the other side that an apology is coming, but you want to broach it like, if it were to happen, how would you respond? Thinking about what level that we talked about, how much do they need to hear? What do you not want to hear? What if you hear that anyway? How are you going to respond? And then exploring the form of delivery. Is it okay if she reads it? So you're preparing them. This may not be the only thing that you're talking about in that caucus, but you're just preparing them for the possibility of an apology. And if they tell you, what I really need to hear is this, and I don't want to hear any excuses, okay, can I share that with them so that if they are going to apologize, they can incorporate your desires into the apology? Usually people say yes. So now you go back with the offender for a second time. And hopefully the offender has been working on their apology, and so they could show you what they've written, or they could practice it with you. I encourage people to rehearse it. I just did this with somebody last week, and they realized, as they were saying it out loud, they realized that their heart wasn't quite in the right place. They hadn't really gotten to the level of taking full ownership and not blaming the other person. So we worked on a little bit till they got it where it needed to be. And then encouraging them to anticipate possible responses from the victim. What would you like to hear? What if you don't hear that? How are you going to handle that? And then we come into the joint session. So any questions about what I've said so far? These caucuses where you're delicately developing the apology. We're in the joint session now. So we've prepared both of the parties. We bring them back together. And as I said, sometimes the apology doesn't happen and you just have to let that go. You never know what's going to happen when you bring them back to the joint session. I've seen people give apologies that were way better than what we practiced in the caucus. And I've also seen apologies that were weaker, like they kind of held back and they weren't quite as good as what we practiced in the caucus. And so you have to be open to whatever happens. So you invite them to speak, and then I like to wait a moment and just see how the other side is going to respond. Like, I would rather not talk and let there be some silence and see what the other side says. But, you don't want it to be too awkward. So you may have to intervene, invite the victim to, if they want to respond, or you can summarize it, acknowledge, Joe has made an apology here. That was an important thing that he wanted to do as part of this mediation. Now let's talk about whatever else we need to talk about. So you're kind of smoothing the way. But don't be surprised if it's different from what you heard in the caucus. So I've kind of raced through all of this, but yeah, I'm going to stop the share now. So questions, comments on the apology in mediation? It's been lovely talking with all of you. I very much appreciate this opportunity to share what I've learned about apology. Yeah.
Thank you
good.
so much for coming in and for talking through us with all of this information, and also the exercises. I think were really helpful.
Good. Great. Well, thank you very much. Keep on doing all of the good work that you are doing at your center. Pleasure to thanks again for Anika for enabling all of this, and for all of you for all the good work that you're doing to make peace.